The sound of hooves thundering against the hard, packed earth filled the air as Fiona Evans raced through the darkness, her heart pounding as violently as her mare's galloping steps. Each jolt sent pain through her abdomen, reminding her of the precious life growing inside her, a life she was determined to protect at all costs. Behind her, torches flickered in the distance, the angry voices of her pursuers carrying on the wind across the Nebraska Territory wilderness of 1875. "Come on, Willow," she whispered to her horse, her gloved hands gripping the reins tightly. "Just a little further." The late September night air bit at her cheeks as she urged the exhausted mare forward. 3 days of hard riding had taken their toll on both of them, but Fiona couldn't afford to stop, not when Arthur Blackburn's men might still be following her trail. Not when her father had practically sold her to that monster, a man 30 years her senior with a reputation for cruelty that extended far beyond the borders of Kansas City. Fiona had only discovered her pregnancy the week before the arranged wedding. It wasn't Arthur's child, he had never touched her, thank God, but belonged to Thomas, the young store clerk she'd fallen in love with during their secret meetings. Thomas, who'd been found beaten nearly to death the day he planned to ask for her hand. Thomas, who died in her arms, whispering that he loved her and their unborn child. The horizon began to lighten, the first hints of dawn breaking over the rolling prairie. Fiona's eyelids felt heavy with exhaustion, and she swayed dangerously in the saddle. She'd been riding without proper rest for too long, fueled only by fear and determination. In the growing light, she spotted a cluster of buildings in the distance, a small town nestled against the backdrop of the river valley. Wood River, she breathed, recalling the name from her hasty study of maps before fleeing. It was small enough to hide in, yet not so remote that she couldn't eventually find work. As she approached the outskirts of town, Willow stumbled, nearly sending Fiona tumbling to the ground. The mare recovered but was clearly at the end of her strength. Fiona's own reserves were failing too, black spots dancing at the edges of her vision. She wouldn't make it much farther. A small ranch appeared to her right, modest but well-kept, with a weathered barn and a small cabin. A thin plume of smoke rose from the chimney despite the early hour. Fiona guided Willow toward it, hoping to beg for water and perhaps a moment's rest before continuing to town. As she approached the barn, her vision swam, the world tilting sideways. The last thing she remembered was slipping from the saddle and the sensation of falling, her hands instinctively moving to protect her stomach before darkness claimed her. Rufus Jackson had been awake since well before dawn, a habit ingrained from years of ranch work. At 32, he ran his small cattle operation alone, preferring the company of his horses and the handful of cattle he raised to the often complicated relationships with people. The solitude suited him, especially after returning from the war with scars both visible and hidden. He was mucking out stalls when he heard the approach of a horse. Visitors were rare, especially at this hour. Grabbing his rifle from where it leaned against the wall, he stepped cautiously to the barn door. The sight that greeted him was unexpected: a woman, clearly exhausted, swaying atop a lathered mare. Before he could call out, she slumped sideways and tumbled from the saddle. Rufus dropped his rifle and ran, reaching her just as she hit the ground. He managed to partially break her fall, cradling her head before it struck the hard earth. She was young, maybe early 20s, with auburn hair escaping from a once neat braid. Her clothes were travel-worn but of good quality, and her hands, though dusty from the trail, showed little evidence of hard labor. "Miss," he called, gently patting her cheek. "Miss, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Rufus glanced around, checking the horizon for any sign of companions or pursuers. Finding none, he carefully lifted her into his arms, surprised by how light she felt despite the swell of pregnancy visible beneath her riding coat. The mare whickered softly, drawing his attention. "Don't worry," he said to the exhausted animal. "I'll come back for you." Inside his cabin, Rufus laid the unconscious woman on his bed, removing only her boots and coat to make her more comfortable. He fetched a basin of cool water and a cloth, gently wiping the dust from her face. Now that he could see her clearly, he noted the dark circles under her eyes and the worry lines etched across her forehead even in unconsciousness. What had driven a pregnant woman to ride to the point of collapse? The question nagged at him as he tended to her horse, removing the saddle and rubbing the mare down before providing fresh water and hay. The saddlebags contained little a change of clothes, a small amount of money, a locket, and a well-worn Bible with the name Fiona Evans inscribed inside the cover. By the time he returned to the cabin, the woman Fiona was beginning to stir. Rufus poured a glass of water and approached the bed slowly, not wanting to frighten her. "Easy now," he said as her eyes fluttered open, revealing irises the color of polished amber. "You're safe." Fiona bolted upright, then immediately clutched her stomach with a gasp of pain. Fear flashed across her face as she registered the unfamiliar surroundings and the tall, bearded stranger standing before her. "Who are you? Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse but carried a refined accent that confirmed his suspicion she wasn't from these parts. "Name's Rufus Jackson. This is my ranch just outside Wood River, Nebraska territory. You collapsed outside my barn." He offered the water. "Your horse is taken care of. She was pretty worn out." Fiona hesitated before accepting the glass, her hands trembling slightly. "Thank you," she murmured, taking a small sip. "I'm Fiona Evans. I know, saw it in your Bible." At her alarmed look, he added, "I only checked your bags to see if there was anything that might tell me who to contact. No one else knows you're here." That seemed to calm her somewhat, though wariness remained in her eyes. "I need to get to town," she said, attempting to stand. "Whoa there," Rufus said, not touching her but positioning himself to catch her if she fell. "You're in no condition to go anywhere right now. You need rest, and so does your horse." "I can't stay," she insisted, even as she sank back onto the bed, her strength failing her. "It's not safe." "Not safe for who? You or me?" Rufus asked, his voice gentle despite the directness of his question. When she didn't answer, he continued, "I don't know what trouble you're in, Miss Evans, but you and your baby need rest. I promise no one will find you here today. Tomorrow, if you still want to go, I won't stop you." Tears filled her eyes suddenly, taking both of them by surprise. "I have nowhere to go," she whispered, the admission seemingly forced from her by exhaustion. Rufus handed her a handkerchief from his pocket. It was clean but worn like most of his possessions. "Rest now. We can figure things out later." Against her better judgment, Fiona found herself nodding. Her eyelids were already growing heavy again, the glass nearly slipping from her grasp. Rufus took it gently and set it aside. "Sleep," he said simply. "I'll be outside if you need anything." As he turned to leave, her voice stopped him. "Mr. Jackson, thank you." He nodded once and stepped outside, closing the door quietly behind him. Fiona slept through most of the day, waking only briefly when Rufus brought her a simple meal of bread, cheese, and broth. Each time she stirred, panic would momentarily grip her until she remembered where she was and who had taken her in. By evening, she felt strong enough to sit up properly and eat a more substantial meal of beans and bacon that Rufus prepared over the fireplace. He kept a respectful distance, sitting in a wooden chair while she remained on the bed, but his quiet presence was oddly comforting. "Your cooking is surprisingly good for a bachelor," she commented, setting aside her empty plate. A hint of a smile touched his lips, partially hidden beneath his neatly trimmed beard. Necessity teaches a man many things. How long have you lived alone out here? She asked, grateful for the distraction from her own troubles. 4 years. He stoked the fire, sending sparks up the chimney. Came west after the war, needed the space. Fiona noted the slight stiffness in his left arm as he moved, and the way his right leg seemed to bear most of his weight when he stood. War wounds, most likely. You have a nice place, she said sincerely. The cabin was small but meticulously clean and well organized. Through the window, she could see the barn and corrals, all solidly built. It's enough for me. He hesitated, then asked, "Do you want to tell me who's after you?" Fiona tensed, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. "What makes you think someone's after me? People don't usually ride until they collapse unless something worse is behind them," he said simply. She looked down at her hands, considering how much to reveal. This man had shown her nothing but kindness, but trusting had become difficult these past months. "My father arranged a marriage for me," she finally said, "to a man named Arthur Blackburn. He's wealthy, influential, and cruel. When I refused my father." She swallowed hard. "He said I had no choice. The wedding was to be last week." Rufus remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "I'm carrying someone else's child, someone I loved very much who died before we could marry." Her voice broke slightly. "Arthur would have killed my baby once it was born, I know it. So I ran. And now Blackburn's men are tracking you." Fiona nodded. "He doesn't take rejection well, and my father owes him a considerable debt. I'm payment." Rufus's expression darkened. "No person should be used as payment for anything," he said, his voice hard. "I agree, but that doesn't change my situation." Fiona sighed. "I need to keep moving, find somewhere to start over, somewhere they won't think to look." "Wood River's small, but strangers stand out," Rufus warned. "First place they'd check. Then what do you suggest?" she asked, fatigue evident in her voice. Rufus seemed to consider something for a long moment before speaking. "Stay here, at least until the baby comes." Fiona stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What?" "No one comes out this way much. I keep to myself so folks don't pay me much mind." "You'd be safer here than in town where questions would be asked." He shifted uncomfortably under her incredulous gaze. "I have a root cellar with a hidden room. Used to be part of the Underground Railroad before the war. If anyone comes looking, you can hide there." "Why would you do this for me?" "You don't even know me." Rufus stood and moved to the window, looking out at the darkening landscape. "Let's just say I understand what it's like to be hunted." The cryptic statement hung in the air between them, but Fiona didn't press. She was too busy weighing her limited options. She had planned to find work in town, perhaps as a seamstress or teacher, but Rufus was right, she would be immediately noticed in a place as small as Wood River. "If I stayed," she said slowly, "I wouldn't expect you to support me. I can cook, clean, help with whatever needs doing." "We can sort all that out tomorrow," he replied. "For now, you should get more rest." As if on cue, exhaustion washed over her again. Despite having slept most of the day, her body still craved recovery from her desperate journey. "Where will you sleep?" she asked, suddenly aware she had taken his only bed. "I've got a bedroll. Used to sleeping rough." He moved toward the door. "I'll check on the animals once more before turning in." After he left, Fiona lay back on the pillow, her mind racing despite her fatigue. She had just agreed to live with a stranger, a man she knew almost nothing about. It was reckless, potentially dangerous, and yet somehow she felt safer here than she had in months. Her hand came to rest on her slightly rounded abdomen. "We'll be all right," she whispered to her unborn child. "Somehow, we'll be all right." The next morning, Fiona woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. For a disorienting moment, she thought she was back home in Kansas City before everything had fallen apart. Then reality returned as she saw the simple cabin and Rufus moving quietly about the small cooking area. "Good morning," she said, sitting up carefully. He turned, a flicker of surprise crossing his face as if he hadn't expected her to still be there. "Morning. How are you feeling?" "Better." She pushed back the blanket and swung her legs over the side of the bed. Her muscles protested after days of hard riding, but the dizziness and exhaustion had receded. "May I use your wash basin?" He nodded toward a screen in the corner. "There's fresh water and soap behind there. Take your time. Breakfast will be ready when you are." Fiona appreciated his consideration. Behind the screen, she found not only the promised water and soap, but also a clean towel and a small mirror hung on a nail. She washed away the grime of travel as best she could and combed her fingers through her tangled hair before rebraiding it. When she emerged, Rufus had set 2 plates on the small table. The food was simple bacon, biscuits, and some preserved fruit, but it smelled wonderful to her hungry senses. "Thank you," she said, taking the offered seat. "For everything." He nodded once and sat across from her, maintaining a respectful distance that she appreciated. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Rufus spoke. "I've been thinking about your situation," he said. "If you're staying, we need a story for why you're here." Fiona set down her fork. "What do you have in mind?" "Wood River's small enough that folks will notice if I suddenly have a woman living at my place. People might start asking questions we don't want to answer." He took a sip of coffee. "But if they think you're my widowed cousin, come to help after losing your husband, they'd accept it without much fuss." "Would they believe that?" "Most would. Those that don't would be too polite to say otherwise to our faces." He shrugged. "It's the best protection I can offer. No one would look for you as my kin." Fiona considered the proposal. It made sense, and the alternative, trying to establish herself elsewhere while visibly pregnant and alone, was fraught with dangers. "All right," she agreed. "We're cousins. Should I use a different name?" "Best not. Too easy to slip up. You're Fiona Jackson now, widow of my cousin William from back east. And the baby, William's child. He died before seeing his son or daughter born." Rufus's expression softened slightly. "It's close enough to the truth to remember easily." Fiona nodded, a lump forming in her throat at the reminder of Thomas. "What do you get out of this arrangement, Mr. Jackson? I'm bringing nothing but trouble to your door." He seemed genuinely confused by the question. "Not everything's about getting something in return, Miss Evans." "Fiona," she corrected gently. "If we're to be cousins, you should use my given name." "Fiona," he echoed, the name sounding different in his deep voice. "And I'm Rufus." "Well, Rufus, I still intend to earn my keep. I won't be a burden." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I don't imagine you could be if you tried." Over the next few days, they established a routine. Rufus showed her the hidden room in the root cellar, accessible by moving a seemingly solid wall of preserved goods. It was small but had ventilation and even a narrow cot. She prayed she would never need to use it. Fiona took over the cooking and household chores, freeing Rufus to focus on his ranch work. She discovered he kept a modest herd of cattle and several horses, including 2 he was training for a neighbor. He worked from dawn until dusk most days, coming in tired but always taking time to check on her well-being. They spoke little during those early days, both comfortable with silence, but Fiona found herself watching him when he wasn't looking. Despite his imposing height and the hard lines of his face, there was a gentleness to Rufus that emerged in small moments: the way he handled nervous horses, how carefully he split wood to ensure she'd have easier pieces to manage for the cookstove, the books of poetry she discovered tucked away on his small bookshelf. On the 4th night, As they sat by the fire after dinner, Fiona finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "What did you mean when you said you understand what it's like to be hunted?" Rufus stared into the flames for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost distant. "During the war, I was a scout for the Union, got captured near the end by a Confederate guerrilla band." His hand unconsciously moved to his right leg. "They weren't interested in prisoners." Fiona remained silent, sensing there was more to the story. "I escaped, but they came after me, tracked me for miles. I nearly bled to death before reaching our lines." He looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "After the war, their leader, a man named Reynolds, swore he'd find me again. Called it unfinished business." "Is that why you came west? To escape him?" Rufus nodded. "Changed my name, too. Used to be Robert Johnston. Figured a man might forget his grudges after a while, but I wasn't taking chances." "Have you heard anything of him since?" "No, and I prefer to keep it that way." He reached for another log, adding it to the fire. "Some ghosts are best left buried." "I'm sorry," Fiona said softly. "It seems we both have pasts we're running from. Difference is, yours is still chasing you." His expression grew serious. "If Blackburn's men come here, you hide. No matter what you hear, you stay hidden until I come for you. Understood?" The intensity of his gaze made her shiver. "Yes, I understand." "Good." His voice softened slightly. "Now tell me more about where you're from. Helps to know details if anyone asks questions." As October progressed, the weather grew colder. Rufus spent several days reinforcing the cabin for winter, ensuring no drafts would disturb Fiona or her growing child. He built a small addition to serve as his sleeping quarters, insisting she keep the main room with its warmer fireplace. Fiona protested at first, but secretly appreciated his thoughtfulness. Her pregnancy was becoming more pronounced, and with it came increasing discomfort and the occasional sharp pain that worried her. She'd never had a child before and had no mother or female relatives to guide her through the experience. One afternoon, while Rufus was in town for supplies, a sharp cramp seized her, stronger than any before. Fear gripped her as she doubled over, clutching the edge of the table. When it passed, she sank into a chair, hands trembling. By the time Rufus returned, she had experienced 2 more such pains, though less severe. He found her pale and anxious, immediately setting aside his purchases to kneel beside her chair. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "I don't know," she admitted, fighting back tears. "I've had pains. I'm afraid something might be wrong with the baby." Rufus frowned. "How far along are you?" "About 5 months, I think." He seemed to consider something. "There's a woman in town, Mrs. Pearson. She's a midwife. I could bring her here." "No." Fiona's reaction was immediate and panicked. "No one can know I'm here." "Fiona, if something's wrong, please, Rufus. I can't risk it." Her eyes pleaded with him. "Not yet." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "At least let me ask her some questions." "I won't mention you. Just say it's for a book I'm reading or something." After some persuasion, Fiona agreed. The next day, Rufus rode into Wood River again, returning with information that somewhat eased their minds. According to Mrs. Pearson, such pains could be normal as the body adjusted to pregnancy, particularly for first-time mothers, but rest and certain herbal teas might help. That evening, Rufus prepared the recommended tea, watching anxiously as Fiona sipped it by the fire. "Better?" he asked when she'd finished. "Yes, thank you." She set the cup aside. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble. It's no trouble." His voice was gruff, but his eyes were kind. "You should rest more. I've been letting you do too much around here." "Nonsense. Keeping busy helps the time pass, and I enjoy feeling useful." She smiled slightly. "Besides, your cooking was dreadful." That drew a rare chuckle from him. Can't argue with that. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling around the corners of the cabin. "Storm's coming," Rufus observed, glancing toward the window. "Will the animals be all right? They're secure in the barn." He rose to add another log to the fire. "We might be in for our first snow tonight." Fiona's expression brightened. "I've always loved the first snowfall. In Kansas City, my mother and I used to." She trailed off, the memory bringing an unexpected wave of grief. "Used to what?" Rufus prompted gently. "We'd make spiced cider and stay up late, watching the snow from the window seat in the parlor." Fiona's voice grew wistful. "She died when I was 16, consumption. I'm sorry." After she was gone, Father changed, became harder, more focused on business and status. She looked down at her hands. "When I told him I was carrying Thomas's child, he called me a disgrace. Said this marriage to Arthur was the only way to save the family name." Rufus's expression darkened. "Some men mistake control for love. Did you ever marry?" Fiona asked, curious about this man who had become her protector. A shadow crossed his face. "Was engaged once before the war. Elizabeth." "She couldn't. Accept how I came back." The admission hung in the air between them, revealing more in what wasn't said than what was. Fiona understood without asking that his wounds, both physical and otherwise, had been too much for his fiancée to bear. "Her loss," Fiona said softly. Their eyes met across the room, a moment of perfect understanding passing between them. Then Rufus looked away, clearing his throat. "Getting late. You should rest." He moved toward the door to his small addition. "Call if you need anything." "Rufus," she called as he reached for the handle. He paused, looking back at her. "Thank you for everything." He nodded once before disappearing through the door, leaving Fiona alone with thoughts that increasingly centered on the quiet, complicated man who had become her unexpected sanctuary. True to Rufus's prediction, snow began falling in the early hours of the morning. Fiona woke to a transformed world, the view from the cabin window revealing a landscape dusted with white. The sight filled her with childlike delight despite her circumstances. When Rufus emerged from his room, he found her already dressed and preparing breakfast, humming softly as she worked. "You're in good spirits," he observed, moving to wash his face in the basin. "It's beautiful out there," she replied, "and I'm feeling much better today." He seemed relieved at that. "Good. I've got to check the herd, make sure they found shelter from the snow. Shouldn't take more than a few hours." "I'll have something warm waiting when you return," she promised. After he left, Fiona busied herself with household tasks, finding comfort in the routine. As she worked, she allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, that this was her real life, a home with a kind man. A baby on the way, simple daily concerns instead of fear and uncertainty. The fantasy was pleasant but dangerous. Rufus had offered shelter, not a future. Once her child was born and it was safe to travel again, she would need to move on, find her own way in the world. Allowing herself to become attached would only make the inevitable parting more painful. Yet as the weeks passed and November settled over the Nebraska plains, Fiona found it increasingly difficult to maintain emotional distance. Rufus, for all his quiet reserve, proved to be a thoughtful companion. He began bringing her books from his trips to town, remembered which foods eased her morning sickness, and even carved a small wooden cradle during the long evening hours, presenting it to her with awkward formality that touched her deeply. For his part, Rufus found himself watching Fiona more often than he cared to admit. The way she moved about his cabin had transformed the space, bringing life and warmth to rooms that had previously been merely functional. Her laughter, rare at first but increasingly frequent, affected him strangely, creating an unfamiliar lightness in his chest. It was dangerous, he knew. She wasn't truly his cousin or his anything. She was a woman in desperate circumstances who had turned to him for help, nothing more. Once her child was born and her situation resolved, she would move on to the life she deserved, not one hidden away with a scarred, solitary rancher with a complicated past. Yet knowing this did nothing to stop the growing tenderness he felt toward her, or the fierce protectiveness that surged whenever he thought of the men who might still be searching for her. That protectiveness was put to the test one cold afternoon in late November. Rufus had been repairing fences on the far side of his property when he spotted riders approaching 3 men, moving with purpose toward his cabin. His blood ran cold. In the 4 years he'd lived here, he'd rarely had visitors and never unannounced. Mounting his horse, he rode hard to intercept them before they reached the house, praying Fiona had seen them coming and hidden herself as they'd planned. The men pulled up as he approached, and Rufus immediately noted their city clothes and the quality of their horses. "Afternoon, gentlemen," he called, keeping his voice casual despite the tension coiling through him. "Can I help you with something?" The leader, a hard-faced man with a neatly trimmed mustache, studied him with cold eyes. "Looking for a young woman. Red hair, about 22, traveling alone. Might have passed through these parts in the last month or so." Rufus maintained an impassive expression. "Haven't seen anyone fitting that description. Not many travelers come this way, especially women alone. Mind if we take a look around?" Another man asked, his hand resting casually near his holstered pistol. "Actually, I do mind," Rufus replied, his own hand dropping to his rifle. "This is private property." The third man, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. "Mr. Blackburn is offering a substantial reward for information. $200. Rufus raised an eyebrow, feigning interest. "That's generous. What'd she do to earn that kind of attention?" "Family matter," the leader said dismissively. "Nothing for you to concern yourself with." "Well, I wish I could help you earn that reward, but like I said, I haven't seen her." Rufus gestured back the way they had come. "Town's about 5 miles that way if you want to ask around. Folks there might know something." The men exchanged glances, clearly weighing whether to press the issue. Rufus tensed, ready for trouble, but after a moment the leader nodded. "Appreciate your time," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "If you do see her, Mr. Blackburn would be very grateful for a message." "I'll keep that in mind," Rufus replied neutrally. He remained motionless, watching as they turned their horses and rode away. Only when they were well out of sight did he spur his mount toward home, anxiety gnawing at him with every hoofbeat. The cabin appeared undisturbed when he arrived. Tying his horse, Rufus approached cautiously, rifle ready. The front door stood slightly ajar, exactly as he'd left it that morning. Inside, the main room was empty, the fire burning low in the grate. There was no sign of struggle or forced entry. "Fiona," he called, moving quickly to the root cellar entrance. When no answer came, he lifted the trapdoor and descended the ladder, heart pounding. "Fiona!" The hidden room appeared empty at first glance. Then a small movement from the darkest corner caught his eye. "It's me," he said softly. "They're gone." Fiona emerged from behind a stack of crates, her face pale with fear. "I saw them coming," she whispered, "just like you said to watch for." She clutched a small kitchen knife in her trembling hand. "Were they?" "Blackburn's men." Rufus gently took the knife from her grip. "You did exactly right. They've gone to town for now, but they'll probably be back." "Did they believe you?" Her voice was small, frightened. "I don't know, but we need to be prepared either way." He helped her up the ladder, noting the way she protectively cradled her expanding abdomen. "Pack whatever you can carry. If they return, we may need to leave quickly." Fear flashed across her face. Leave? But where would we go? I have a friend about 20 miles north. Old trapper named Harlan who keeps to himself. We could stay there until we figure out something more permanent. Fiona nodded, trying to be brave despite the trembling of her lips. I'll start packing. As she moved toward her few belongings, Rufus caught her arm gently. Fiona, I won't let them take you, I promise. For a moment, she simply stared at him, amber eyes wide with emotion. Then, without warning, she stepped forward and pressed herself against his chest, her arms wrapping around his waist. Thank you, she whispered against his shirt. Stunned, Rufus stood frozen before cautiously returning the embrace, one hand awkwardly patting her back. It had been years since anyone had hugged him, longer still since he'd held a woman. The sensation was both foreign and achingly familiar. Too soon, Fiona pulled away, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. It's all right, he interrupted, his voice rougher than usual. No need to apologize. They busied themselves with preparations after that, carefully avoiding each other's gaze as they packed essentials and secured the cabin. By nightfall, they were ready to flee at a moment's notice, with 2 horses saddled and waiting in the barn. Dinner was a tense affair, both of them listening for sounds of approaching riders. When none came, they settled by the fire, too anxious for sleep despite their exhaustion. Tell me about your friend, Fiona said eventually, breaking the heavy silence. The trapper. Rufus seemed grateful for the distraction. Harlan's a character, fought in the Mexican War, then decided civilization wasn't for him, built a cabin up in the hills and has lived there ever since. Comes to town maybe twice a year for supplies. How did you meet him? My first winter here, there was a bad blizzard. I got caught out checking the herd, couldn't find my way back. Rufus stared into the fire, remembering. Harlan found me half frozen and took me in, nursed me back to health over 3 days before the weather cleared enough to bring me home. He sounds like a good man. The best. Odd as they come, but with a heart to match. Rufus glanced at her. He'll help us, no questions asked. Fiona nodded, trying to take comfort in that. Do you think they'll come back tonight? Doubtful. They'll ask around town first, maybe check other ranches. He hesitated. But we should be ready to move at first light, just in case. The conversation lapsed into silence again, each lost in their own thoughts. Eventually, Fiona rose to retire, pausing at the door to her room. Rufus. He looked up questioningly. I'm sorry for bringing this trouble to you. I never meant to put your home at risk. His expression softened. This place is just land and lumber. It's not worth what they do to you. The simple statement, delivered without drama or expectation, moved Fiona more deeply than flowery declarations ever could. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt truly protected, not as a possession to be guarded, but as a person valued for herself. That night, despite her fears, Fiona slept better than she had in weeks. Morning came with no sign of Blackburn's men. Rufus rode to the edge of his property to scout, but returned reporting no unusual activity. Still, they remained vigilant, ready to flee at the first sign of trouble. Days passed in this state of alert tension. November gave way to December, bringing colder temperatures and occasional snow flurries. Fiona's pregnancy progressed, her body changing daily as her child grew. The threat of discovery hung over them, but as weeks passed without incident, they gradually resumed something resembling normal life. One evening, as Christmas approached, Rufus returned from town with more supplies than usual, including small packages wrapped in brown paper. What's all this? Fiona asked, helping him unload. Just a few things for the holiday, he replied, seeming almost embarrassed. And some warmer clothes for you. Mrs. Pearson at the general store helped me with the sizes. Mrs. Pearson, the midwife. Alarm tinged Fiona's voice. Don't worry, he assured her quickly. I told her they were for my cousin who's visiting after New Year's. She didn't question it. Fiona relaxed slightly, then noticed a particularly large bundle. And what's that? That, Rufus said, a rare smile touching his lips, is a surprise for Christmas morning. Despite her curiosity, Fiona didn't press. The thought that he had taken time to plan Christmas gifts for her was touching enough without spoiling his surprise. On Christmas Eve, they shared a special dinner rabbit stew with dumplings and dried apple pie for dessert. Rufus had even splurged on a small bottle of blackberry cordial, pouring Fiona just a thimbleful in deference to her condition. As they sat by the fire afterward, Fiona felt a strange sensation in her abdomen, a fluttering movement unlike the cramps she had experienced before. Her hand flew to her belly, a soft gasp escaping her lips. "What is it? Are you in pain?" Rufus asked, immediately concerned. "No," she whispered, wonder filling her voice. "The baby moved, I felt it." Without thinking, she reached for his hand. "Here." Hesitantly, Rufus allowed her to place his large, calloused palm against the swell of her stomach. For several moments, nothing happened, and he began to withdraw his hand. Then came a distinct movement beneath his fingers, the unmistakable press of a tiny foot or hand. His eyes widened, meeting Fiona's with shared amazement. "That's really something," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. "Yes," she agreed softly. "It is." Neither moved for several heartbeats, connected by the miracle of life stirring beneath their joined hands. The moment held a profound intimacy that transcended physical desire, binding them together in ways neither had anticipated. Finally, Rufus gently pulled his hand away, clearing his throat. "Getting late, should probably turn in." "Yes, of course." Fiona rose, suddenly aware of how domestic the evening had become, how dangerously close she was to forgetting this wasn't truly her home, her life. "Good night, Rufus." "Good night, Fiona." He hesitated, then added, "Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas," she echoed, a bittersweet ache filling her chest as she retreated to her room. Christmas morning dawned bright and cold. Fiona woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Rufus moving quietly around the main room. Wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, she emerged to find him stoking the fire, the large bundle from yesterday now sitting prominently near her chair. "Morning," he greeted her. "Coffee's hot if you want some." "Thank you." She poured herself a cup, eyeing the package curiously. "What's that?" "Your Christmas gift." He gestured for her to open it, an uncharacteristic nervousness in his manner. Fiona set her coffee aside and carefully unwrapped the paper. Inside was a rocking chair beautifully crafted of polished wood, with a cushioned seat and back. "Oh, Rufus," she breathed, running her fingers along the smooth armrests. "It's beautiful. Thought it might be more comfortable for you, especially as—" He trailed off, gesturing vaguely toward her growing belly. "Anyway, the man in town who makes furniture owed me a favor. It's perfect." She looked up at him, blinking back unexpected tears. "I have something for you too, though it's not nearly as grand." From a small drawer, she retrieved a package wrapped in a scrap of fabric. Rufus accepted it with evident surprise, as if the idea of receiving a gift hadn't occurred to him. Inside was a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue wool. "I used some yarn I found in your storage chest," Fiona explained. "I hope that was all right." "You made this?" he asked, running the soft material through his fingers. She nodded. "I've been working on it in the evenings. It gets so cold when you're out with the herd, and your old one was falling apart." Rufus wrapped the scarf around his neck, the blue bringing out flecks of the same color in his gray eyes. "Thank you. It's been a long time since anyone gave me a Christmas gift." The simple admission squeezed Fiona's heart. Impulsively, she rose on tiptoe and pressed a quick kiss to his weathered cheek. "Merry Christmas, Rufus." His expression softened in a way she had never seen before, making him look younger, less burdened. "Merry Christmas, Fiona." The tender moment was shattered by the sound of approaching horses. Multiple riders coming fast. Rufus's expression immediately hardened. He moved to the window, peering cautiously outside. 3 riders, same ones as before. Fear clutched at Fiona's heart. "They've come back." "Get your coat and boots. We need to move quickly." Rufus was already grabbing his rifle and the emergency packs they had prepared. "Head for the root cellar. I'll try to send them away, but if there's trouble, you take the back way out and go to the barn. The horses are ready." "Rufus," she began, but he cut her off. "No time. Go now." His voice was urgent but controlled. "Remember the plan." Fiona nodded, fighting back panic as she hurriedly dressed for travel. As she descended into the root cellar, she heard the cabin door open and Rufus's voice greeting the visitors with forced casualness. The hidden room felt colder than usual, or perhaps it was just her fear. Fiona strained to hear the conversation above, but the thick floorboards muffled the words. She could discern only the rumble of male voices, occasionally rising in what seemed like argument. Then came the sound she dreaded: boots moving across the cabin floor, opening doors, searching. They were looking for her. Fiona pressed back against the wall of her hiding place, one hand protectively covering her belly while the other gripped the small pistol Rufus had insisted she carry. Suddenly, there was a loud crash above, followed by the unmistakable sound of a scuffle. A gunshot rang out, then another. Fiona bit her lip to keep from crying out, tasting blood as she fought to remain silent despite the terror gripping her. More shouts, another crash, then an ominous silence. Tears streamed down Fiona's face as she waited, praying Rufus was all right. Minutes stretched like hours in the darkness of her hiding place. Finally, footsteps approached the root cellar door. Fiona raised her pistol with trembling hands, prepared to defend herself and her unborn child. The trapdoor lifted, and Rufus's voice called down softly, "Fiona, it's safe now." Relief flooded through her, weakening her knees as she emerged from hiding. In the main room, she found one of Blackburn's men unconscious on the floor, his hands bound behind him. Of the others, there was no sign. Rufus himself was bleeding from a cut above his eye, his shirt torn at the shoulder. "Are you hurt?" she asked, rushing to examine his injuries. "I'm fine," he assured her, though his voice was tight with pain. "The other 2 ran off when I got the upper hand with this one. They'll be back with more men." "What do we do now?" "We ride for Harlan's like we planned." He gestured to the unconscious man. "I'll leave him tied up here. By the time he gets free or his friends return, we'll be long gone." Fiona nodded, forcing herself to remain calm despite the urgency of their situation. "I'm ready." Within minutes, they were mounted and riding away from the cabin, following a little-used trail that wound northward through the hills. Fiona cast one last glance at the place that had become her sanctuary over these past months, wondering if she would ever see it again. The journey to Harlan's cabin was grueling. Heavy clouds threatened snow, and the temperature dropped steadily as they climbed higher into the hills. Rufus set a pace that balanced speed with caution, mindful of Fiona's condition. Even so, the constant motion and cold were taking their toll on her. By mid-afternoon, large snowflakes began to fall, quickly blanketing the landscape in white. The wind picked up, driving the snow horizontally and reducing visibility to mere yards. Fiona huddled deeper into her coat, her hands numb despite heavy gloves. Not much farther. Rufus called over the wind. "There's a sheltered valley just ahead. Harlan's place is on the far side." Fiona nodded, too cold to respond verbally. The baby moved restlessly within her, as if sensing her distress. She placed a protective hand over her abdomen, silently promising that everything would be all right. As they crested a ridge, Rufus suddenly pulled up short, signaling for silence. Straining her ears, Fiona could just make out the sound of horses somewhere ahead of them, partially masked by the howling wind. "They've cut us off," Rufus muttered, his expression grim. "Must have guessed where we were headed." "What do we do?" Fiona whispered, fear constricting her throat. Rufus scanned the surrounding terrain, considering their options. "There's another way, but it's longer and rougher. We'll have to double back and circle around." The alternative route proved even more challenging than anticipated. The trail, barely deserving of the name, wound through dense thickets and across steep ravines. Twice they had to dismount and lead the horses through particularly treacherous sections. The snow continued to fall, obliterating landmarks and making navigation increasingly difficult. By nightfall, Fiona was shivering uncontrollably, exhaustion etched deeply into her features. Rufus cast worried glances her way, knowing they couldn't continue much longer in these conditions. When they reached a small cluster of pines that offered some shelter from the wind, he called a halt. "We need to stop for the night," he said, helping her dismount. "You're freezing." "But Blackburn's men," she began, her teeth chattering. "Won't be moving in this weather either," he finished, "and we're well off the main trail now." Working quickly, Rufus erected a simple lean-to using pine branches and the tarp he carried in his pack. Inside this rudimentary shelter, he built a small, nearly smokeless fire using techniques learned during the war. The space was cramped, but offered protection from the worst of the elements. Fiona huddled as close to the fire as safety allowed, gratefully accepting the jerky and hardtack Rufus offered. The food helped restore some warmth to her body, but she continued to shiver. "Here," Rufus said, removing his heavy coat and draping it around her shoulders. "This will help." "But you'll freeze," she protested weakly. "I've got the fire to tend," he replied, though they both knew the small flame provided minimal heat. "Try to get some rest. We'll start again at first light." Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Fiona. Every sound in the forest seemed magnified in the darkness, branches creaking under the weight of snow, the occasional call of a night bird, the soft nickering of their horses tethered nearby. Mostly, though, she was aware of Rufus, sitting alert at the edge of their shelter, rifle across his knees as he kept watch. "Rufus," she whispered after what felt like hours. "Are you awake?" "Yes," came his immediate reply. "You should rest too. We can take turns watching." He shook his head, visible in the dying firelight. "I'm fine. You need the sleep more than I do." Fiona sat up, wincing at the stiffness in her back. "At least come closer to the fire. You're too far away to get any warmth at all." After a moment's hesitation, Rufus moved nearer, settling beside her but still maintaining a careful distance. Fiona, emboldened by concern, closed the gap between them, pressing against his side and arranging his coat to cover them both. "Fiona," he began, his voice strained. "Don't be foolish," she interrupted. "We'll both freeze separately. This is just practical." Gradually, Rufus relaxed, his body heat combining with hers beneath the shared covering. Fiona rested her head cautiously against his shoulder, feeling the tension in his muscles slowly ebb. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly after a while. "Risking everything for me." Rufus was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost reverent. "When you first arrived, I thought I was just offering shelter to someone in need. Something anyone decent would do." He stared into the glowing embers of their fire. "But it became more than that." "What do you mean?" Fiona asked, her heart beating faster. "Before you came, I was just existing, getting through each day, not really living." His hand moved hesitantly to cover hers. "You reminded me there's more to life than just surviving." Fiona turned her palm upward, intertwining her fingers with his. You saved me, Rufus, not just from Blackburn, but from despair. We saved each other, I reckon, he murmured. She tilted her face up to look at him, snowflakes catching in her eyelashes. In the faint glow of the dying fire, their eyes met and held. Something shifted between them, an unspoken understanding that transcended their circumstances. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Rufus lowered his head until his lips met hers. The kiss was gentle, almost questioning at first, then deepening as Fiona responded with unexpected hunger. Her hands came up to frame his face, feeling the roughness of his beard against her palms. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard, visible puffs in the cold night air. Rufus rested his forehead against hers, his expression a mixture of wonder and concern. "I never meant for this to happen," he admitted. "You deserve better than a broken-down ex-soldier with nothing to offer." "Don't," she whispered fiercely. "Don't diminish what you are, what you've given me." She placed his hand over her rounded abdomen where her child grew. "You've given us a future when we had none. That's everything, Rufus. Everything." They spent the remainder of the night in each other's arms, finding warmth and comfort amid the howling storm. Neither spoke of what would come after, of Blackburn's continued pursuit, or the uncertain road ahead. For this one night, it was enough simply to acknowledge the feelings that had been growing between them since that first autumn morning when Fiona collapsed at his door. Dawn arrived with clearing skies and diminishing winds. The snow had stopped sometime during the night, leaving the landscape transformed under a pristine white blanket. They broke camp quickly, aware that the improved weather would allow Blackburn's men to resume their pursuit. The journey to Harlan's cabin took most of the morning, their progress slowed by deep snow drifts and Fiona's increasing discomfort. When finally they crested a ridge and spotted a plume of smoke rising from a small cabin nestled in the valley below, both felt a surge of relief. Harlan proved to be exactly as Rufus had described, eccentric but warm-hearted. The old trapper, his beard nearly white and reaching to his chest, welcomed them without question, ushering Fiona to the warmest spot by his fire while Rufus tended the horses. "Any friend of Rufus is welcome here," he declared, preparing coffee in a battered pot. "Especially one in your condition, madam." His casual acceptance of their situation touched Fiona deeply. After months of hiding, of feeling like a fugitive, Harlan's matter-of-fact hospitality was like a balm to her spirit. That night, as they gathered around Harlan's table for a simple but hearty meal, Rufus explained their situation: Blackburn's pursuit, the danger, their narrow escape. The old trapper listened intently, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. "So this Blackburn fella wants to force you to marry him, even though you're carrying another man's child?" he asked Fiona directly. "Yes. My father owed him money and I was to be the payment." She met the old man's gaze steadily. "I couldn't let my child be raised by such a man." Harlan nodded, respect evident in his weathered features. "You did right to run, girl. No one should be traded like cattle." He turned to Rufus. "And you, where do you stand in all this?" Rufus glanced at Fiona, something unspoken passing between them before he answered. "Wherever she needs me to be." The simple declaration brought warmth to Fiona's cheeks and a knowing smile to Harlan's lips. "Well then," the old man said, "you're both welcome to stay as long as needed. But we should prepare for visitors. Men like this Blackburn don't give up easily." Over the next few days, they fortified the cabin as best they could. Harlan, despite his age, proved remarkably resourceful, showing them hidden escape routes and teaching Fiona to use various weapons she might need to defend herself. On their fourth evening at the cabin, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Fiona felt a sharp, twisting pain in her abdomen, stronger than anything she had experienced before. She gasped, clutching her stomach. "Fiona!" Rufus was immediately at her side, concern etched deeply in his features. "Something's wrong," she whispered, fear evident in her voice. The baby, another spasm hit, causing her to double over. Rufus looked to Harlan in alarm. "How far along is she?" the old man asked, his manner suddenly businesslike. "About 6 months," Rufus answered. "Too early for the baby to come." Harlan frowned, helping Fiona to lie down on his bed. "Sometimes stress and hard travel can bring on labor before its time. Let me have a look." With surprising gentleness, the old trapper examined Fiona, asking questions about her symptoms and the nature of her pain. Finally, he straightened, his expression relieved. "Not labor," he announced. "False pains, body's way of preparing, especially when there's been strain." He patted Fiona's hand reassuringly. "Rest is what you need, girl. Complete rest." Relief washed over both Fiona and Rufus. "Are you certain?" she asked, still frightened by the intensity of the pain. "Been delivering babies for nigh on 40 years, Harlan replied with a wink. "My wife was a midwife before she passed, taught me everything she knew." This revelation surprised them both. "I didn't know you were married," Rufus said. A shadow crossed the old man's face. "Long time ago, lost her and our little one in childbirth." He shook off the memory visibly. "That's why I know how important it is to keep you calm and rested, young lady. No more adventures until that baby's ready." For the next week, Fiona followed Harlan's instructions faithfully, remaining in bed except for brief periods. Rufus rarely left her side, reading to her from Harlan's small collection of books and discussing plans for their future with increasing openness. "We could head west," he suggested one afternoon as snowflakes drifted past the window. "California, maybe, or Oregon. Start fresh where no one knows us." "What about your ranch?" Fiona asked, concerned about what he might be giving up. "It's just land," he replied, echoing his words from before. "We can build something new together." The idea filled Fiona with hope, a real home, a family, a life free from fear. Yet she worried about asking Rufus to sacrifice so much. "Are you certain this is what you want? Taking on another man's child, leaving everything you've built?" Rufus took her hand, his gaze steady and sure. "I've never been more certain of anything. You and the baby. You're my family now, if you'll have me." Tears filled Fiona's eyes as she squeezed his hand. "I would be honored to build a life with you, Rufus Jackson." Their newfound happiness was interrupted the following morning by the distant sound of approaching horses. Harlan, who had been checking his trap lines, burst through the door, his expression grim. "Riders coming. 6, maybe 7. He grabbed his rifle from beside the door. Time to make some hard choices. Rufus moved immediately to the window, assessing the situation. "They'll be here within minutes." No time to run, especially with Fiona's condition. "The root cellar," Harlan suggested. "Like at your place, she could hide there." Rufus shook his head. "They'll search every inch, and they won't be fooled twice." Fiona struggled to her feet, fear and determination warring within her. "I won't keep running. I won't put you both in danger anymore." "What are you saying?" Rufus turned to her, alarm evident in his expression. "I'm saying this ends today." Her hand rested protectively over her belly. "One way or another." The three of them formulated a hasty plan, having mere minutes before Blackburn's men arrived. When hoofbeats sounded in the yard outside, they were as ready as they could be. Rufus positioned himself near the window, rifle in hand but not visible from outside. Harlan stood by the door, appearing to be simply an old man disturbed from his solitude. Fiona remained in the bedroom, out of sight but with a clear view through the partially open door. The knock, when it came, was forceful, a demand rather than a request. Harlan opened the door to reveal the same 3 men who had visited Rufus's ranch, plus 3 others. At their center stood a tall, elegantly dressed man with silver at his temples and cold eyes that immediately marked him as Arthur Blackburn himself. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Harlan asked, feigning ignorance. "We're looking for a young woman," Blackburn replied, his cultured voice at odds with the menace in his gaze. "Red hair, pregnant. She's in the company of a rancher named Jackson. We tracked them to this area." Harlan scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Ain't seen no woman around these parts in months. Just me and the wildlife up here." "Search the cabin," Blackburn ordered, ignoring the old man's words. 2 of his men pushed past Harlan, who made a show of protest but offered no real resistance. From her hiding place, Fiona watched as they began a methodical search of the main room. As they approached the bedroom door, Rufus stepped into view, rifle raised. "That's far enough." The men froze, hands moving toward their guns. Blackburn himself showed no surprise, merely a cold calculation as he assessed this new development. "Mr. Jackson, I presume." His voice was smooth as silk. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." "Fiona belongs to no one," Rufus replied, his tone level despite the fury evident in his eyes. "Especially not a man who would hunt a pregnant woman across 2 territories. Blackburn smiled thinly. "This is a private matter between myself and my fiancée. Step aside, and perhaps we can resolve this without bloodshed." "There's nothing to resolve," came Fiona's voice as she stepped into the room, ignoring Rufus's alarmed look. "I am not, nor will I ever be your fiancé, Mr. Blackburn." For a moment, something like genuine emotion crossed Blackburn's face, a mixture of relief at finding her and anger at her defiance. "Fiona, my dear, you've led us on quite a chase." "A chase that ends here," she replied, moving to stand beside Rufus. "I want you to leave us alone, forever." Blackburn laughed, the sound entirely devoid of humor. "That's not how this works. Your father made a deal." "My father sold me to cover his gambling debts," Fiona interrupted, her voice strong despite her fear. "That doesn't make it legal or right." "The law will see it differently," Blackburn countered. "A woman in your condition has few options, especially once I tell them how you stole valuable items from my home before fleeing." "That's a lie," Fiona gasped. "Perhaps, but who will they believe? A respected businessman or a runaway pregnant girl?" Blackburn's confidence was absolute. "Come home with me now, and I'll be magnanimous. We can still be married, raise the child as my own. No one need know the truth." Rufus's grip on his rifle tightened, but Fiona placed a calming hand on his arm. "And if I refuse?" she asked Blackburn. "Then Mr. Jackson and this old man die right here and you come with me anyway." His expression hardened. "Those are your only options, my dear." The room fell silent, tension thick in the air. Fiona looked from Rufus to Harlan, then back to Blackburn. Her hand moved to her abdomen, feeling the slight movement of her child within. "There's another option you haven't considered," she said finally, her voice steady. "The truth." From within her pocket, she withdrew a folded document that Harlan had helped her draft the previous day. "This is a sworn affidavit detailing how my father gambled away his business to you, and how you demanded me as additional payment. It includes dates, witnesses, and specifics that only those involved would know." Blackburn's eyes narrowed. "No one would believe. I've sent copies to the territorial marshal in Omaha and to newspapers in 3 cities," she continued, though this was a bluff. "If anything happens to me, or to Rufus or Harlan, those letters will be delivered immediately." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Blackburn's face. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Fiona challenged. Are you willing to risk your reputation, your standing in society on that assumption? Because I promise you, Mr. Blackburn, I have nothing left to lose." The standoff continued, neither side willing to back down. Then Harlan, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, spoke up. "Got another piece you might want to consider," he said, addressing Blackburn directly. "That territorial marshal she mentioned, he's my nephew. Been meaning to visit his old uncle for months now. In fact," he glanced pointedly out the window, "might be him coming up the trail right now." All eyes followed his gaze to where a distant rider could indeed be seen approaching through the snow. It wasn't the marshal, couldn't be, since Harlan had fabricated that connection entirely, but Blackburn had no way of knowing that. The businessman's composure finally cracked. "This isn't over," he snarled, but the threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. With a curt nod to his men, he turned and stormed from the cabin. They watched in tense silence as Blackburn and his entourage mounted their horses and rode away, not fully believing their gambit had worked until the riders disappeared from view. "Was that really the marshal?" Rufus asked Harlan once they were gone. The old trapper chuckled. "Nah, probably just Bill Parker from over the ridge coming to trade furs, but they didn't know that." Fiona sank into a chair, her legs suddenly too weak to support her. "Will they come back?" "Not if they believe your bluff about those letters," Rufus said, kneeling beside her. "And I think they did." "We should still be cautious," Harlan advised. "Men like that don't give up easily, but they do calculate risks, and right now, you've made yourself too risky to pursue." Fiona nodded, her hand seeking Rufus's. "Then we still need to leave, go somewhere he can't find us." "West," Rufus agreed, squeezing her fingers gently. "As soon as you're strong enough to travel." Harlan cleared his throat. "Before you two start planning your great adventure, there's something else we should discuss." His expression grew serious. "If you're going to be a family, might be best to make it official before that little one arrives." Fiona and Rufus exchanged glances, a silent question passing between them. It was Rufus who spoke first, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Fiona, I know this isn't how either of us imagined things would be, but—" He took both her hands in his. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, not for appearance or protection, but because I love you? Because I want to spend my life with you and your child if you'll have me." Tears spilled down Fiona's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Rufus Jackson." Harlan beamed at them both. "Well then, it just so happens I'm authorized to perform marriages in this territory. Benefits of being the only literate man for 20 miles in the early days." 3 days later, on a bright winter morning with sunlight reflecting off the snow-covered landscape, Fiona Evans became Fiona Jackson in a simple ceremony in Harlan's cabin. She wore her cleanest dress, with pine boughs in her hair in place of flowers. Rufus had shaved his beard and trimmed his hair, looking younger and somehow more vulnerable as he recited vows written in his own hand. The words they exchanged were heartfelt and honest promises, not of blind devotion or unquestioning obedience, but of partnership, respect, and unwavering support through whatever challenges might lie ahead. As Harlan pronounced them husband and wife, the first true peace Fiona had known in months settled over her like a blessing. That night, as they lay together in the small room Harlan had insisted they take as a wedding gift, Rufus held Fiona close, his hand resting protectively over the swell of her abdomen. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, noting his contemplative expression. "How strange life is," he replied softly. 6 months ago I was alone, just existing day to day. Now I have a wife, a child on the way, a whole future I never expected. You regret it?" Fiona's voice held a hint of vulnerability. Taking on another man's child, giving up your home. Rufus propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. I regret nothing. Your baby will be my child in every way that matters. And home isn't a place, Fiona. It's the people you love. She reached up to touch his face, tracing the scar that ran along his temple. When did you know that you loved me? I think part of me knew the first day when you fell from your horse into my arms, he admitted, but I didn't want to acknowledge it. Didn't think I deserved happiness after everything in my past. And now I know better. He smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed his usually solemn face. Love isn't about deserving, it's about accepting the gift when it's offered. Fiona pulled him down for a kiss, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. I love you, Rufus Jackson. And I love you, Fiona Jackson, he replied, the name still new and wonderful on his tongue. They remained at Harlan's cabin through January and into February, allowing Fiona's pregnancy to progress safely while they planned their journey west. Rufus made a quick trip back to his ranch, finding it undisturbed with no sign that Blackburn's men had returned. He collected what valuables and supplies they would need, sold the cattle to a neighboring rancher, and returned to Harlan's with a wagon better suited for their long journey. By early March, with the first hints of spring beginning to soften the winter landscape, they were ready to depart. The morning of their leave-taking was bittersweet, with Harlan trying to disguise his emotion behind gruff words. You take care of her and that baby, he instructed Rufus as they loaded the last of their supplies. Oregon's a fine place to start over. Good land, good people. We wouldn't have made it this far without you, Rufus said, clasping the older man's hand firmly. You'll always have a place with us whenever you want it. Harlan nodded, blinking rapidly. Might just take you up on that someday, getting too old for these winters. Fiona, now in her 8th month and moving with the careful dignity of advanced pregnancy, embraced the old trapper warmly. Thank you for everything, Harlan. We'll write as soon as we're settled. You just focus on bringing that baby into the world healthy, he replied, patting her shoulder awkwardly. The rest will sort itself out. As they set off down the trail, Fiona seated comfortably in the wagon while Rufus drove. She found herself looking forward rather than back. The road ahead would be long and not without challenges, but for the first time in her life, she was traveling it on her own terms, with the man she loved by her side. Their journey west was slow but steady, dictated by Fiona's condition and the gradual improvement in weather. They followed the Oregon Trail, joining other settlers heading toward new beginnings. In the evenings, gathered around campfires, they shared stories and dreams, forming friendships that would sustain them in the months and years ahead. It was near the eastern border of Oregon, with the Blue Mountains rising majestically before them, that Fiona's labor began. The wagon train had stopped for a 2-day rest, allowing animals and people alike to recover from the rigors of the trail. The timing, Rufus would later say, was nothing short of providential. Among their traveling companions was a young doctor and his wife, heading west to establish a practice in Portland. When Fiona's waters broke shortly after midnight, Rufus wasted no time in seeking their help. The labor was long but uncomplicated. Throughout the hours of pain and effort, Rufus never left Fiona's side, his strong hand providing an anchor as she worked to bring their child into the world. When dawn broke over the mountains, its first golden rays illuminated the newest member of their family, a healthy boy with a shock of dark hair and his mother's amber eyes. He's perfect, Rufus whispered, cradling the infant with a tenderness few would have expected from his weathered hands. Absolutely perfect, Fiona, exhausted but radiant, watched her husband hold her son with tears of joy streaming down her face. "What shall we name him?" she asked softly. Rufus considered for a moment. "Thomas," he suggested, honoring the child's biological father. "Thomas Harlan Jackson." "It's beautiful," Fiona agreed, reaching out to touch her son's tiny hand. "Welcome to the world, Thomas Harlan Jackson. You are so very loved." The wagon train remained camped for several additional days, allowing Fiona to regain some strength before continuing their journey. During this time, Rufus hardly left their side, marveling at every small movement and sound his new son made. On the fourth evening after Thomas's birth, as Fiona nursed the baby in the soft light of their lantern, she looked up to find Rufus watching them with an expression of such profound love that it caught her breath. "What is it?" she asked, smiling at his intensity. "Just thinking about how close I came to missing all this," he replied, moving to sit beside her. "If you hadn't collapsed at my door that day." "But I did," she reminded him, leaning against his solid warmth. "And here we are." "Here we are," he echoed, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "A family." The word hung in the air between them, filled with promise and possibility. A family, something neither had truly known for years, now created through chance, choice, and love. By summer's end, they had reached the fertile Willamette Valley of western Oregon. Using the money from the sale of Rufus's Nebraska ranch, they purchased a modest homestead with good soil and a view of distant mountains. The cabin was smaller than the one they had left behind, but Rufus immediately set about expanding it, building not just for present needs, but for the future they both envisioned. Thomas thrived in his new home, growing strong and curious under the devoted care of both parents. Fiona, recovering her strength, began planting a garden and making connections with neighboring families. Rufus took to Oregon ranching with the same quiet competence he had shown in Nebraska, gradually building a small but healthy herd of cattle. Letters arrived periodically from Harlan, his spidery handwriting detailing the changing seasons in his mountain valley and dropping hints that he might join them before another winter set in. The last communication had included news that Arthur Blackburn had suffered significant financial setbacks and had been forced to sell his Kansas City holdings, a development that allowed Fiona to finally release the last of her fear about being found. On a golden autumn afternoon, much like the one when they had first met, Rufus found Fiona sitting on the porch of their cabin, watching Thomas take wobbly steps across the yard while clutching a wooden horse Rufus had carved for him. "He's getting faster," Rufus observed, settling beside her on the bench he had built that summer. "Soon he'll be outrunning us both." Fiona laughed, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "Good luck to him. He'll have his work cut out for him in a few months." Rufus looked at her questioningly. Fiona took his hand and placed it gently over her abdomen, her eyes sparkling with joy. "Spring," she said simply. "Another little Jackson to join our family." The look of wonder that spread across Rufus's face was everything Fiona could have hoped for. He gathered her into his arms, mindful of her still flat stomach, and held her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "More than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," she replied, her heart full to bursting. "My protector, my partner, my home." As the sun dipped toward the distant mountains, casting long shadows across their land, Fiona reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From desperate flight to profound love, from fear to security, from solitude to family, every step, however difficult, had led them exactly where they were meant to be. Thomas toddled toward them, his face alight with the simple joy of movement and discovery. Rufus scooped him up, settling the boy between them on the bench as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the evening sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new memories to create together. But for now, in this perfect moment of peace, Fiona Evans Jackson knew with absolute certainty that she had found exactly where she belonged, not in a place, but in the hearts of the two people beside her, and in the promise of the new life growing within her. The woman who had fled in fear had found not just safety but purpose, love, and a future brighter than she could have imagined. And the lonely cowboy who had hidden her had found his true calling not in solitude, but in the family they had created together, bound by choice rather than blood, and all the stronger for it.